Hey everyone. Today's story takes us to Baraboo, Wisconsin, a city of roughly 13,000 people, where an incident occurred on May 31st that has made some waves on the internet and left a ton of people wondering, why? Video taken from that fateful day shows a graduation ceremony for the outgoing senior class of Baraboo High School. Only, as one particular student's name is called as she goes to shake the superintendent's hand on the stage, one of the parents does something shocking. The girl's father suddenly appears, rushes the stage, leaps up the steps, and shoves the superintendent, who's waiting to shake his daughter's hand, aside, completely halting graduation proceedings in the process. And at first, when everyone saw this, people were left without answers and could only speculate as to the reason why this father had done something so absurd and disruptive, why he had chosen to ruin his own daughter's graduation ceremony. This is the footage from the incident.
Oh, excuse me. Where's Brendan?
Man, you better get up off
Where's
me,
Brendan?
man.
Where's
Get away from me, bro.
No, don't.
Hey, no, you need to get, hey,
Walk away.
hey.
Walk away.
Get off. You gotta go.
I will get off.
Out right now. You are there. I don't care. Get off the stage right now. Get off.
That way, Michael. No. Where's Brendan? Whose dad is that? Who's that?
Brendan's
Okay. Who's up?
As I mentioned before, this video initially went viral without any context or additional information about the why, which led to a lot of speculation that the one thing people could observe in the video, that this was a white man going after the only black person on the stage, must be the explanation for his actions. TikTok creator Tizzy Ent certainly thought so, captioning his re-upload of the video with, "A father interrupts graduation because he doesn't want a black superintendent to shake his daughter's hand." He didn't pose it as a question, but more as a statement of the man's motivations. Wisconsin State Representative Francesca Hong tweeted, "No one should have to endure this type of gross and racist conduct." YouTube creator Rise Hendricks TV made a video titled, "Wisconsin Father Blocks Daughter from Shaking Black Man's Hand at Graduation, Fueled by Racism." And certainly, considering this is the same high school that just 5 years ago found itself embroiled in a controversy after a huge group of students were accused of posing for a junior prom photo while doing a salute that looked, suspicious, it seemed logical and warranted to maybe ascribe this to a racial motivation. But as I was going through all the facts of the case here, expecting to make more of a standard racist punished for X update video, I stumbled on a ton of information I didn't expect, and which led me to second guess the assumptions I, and many others, made about this man's motivations. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to make a case that racism had nothing to do with this, mind you, but I did discover a different potential motivation that may have set this guy off. One that almost everyone else who covered this has missed. But first, there was this statement from the Baraboo School Board, which the school board members gathered on June 4th to read aloud while awkwardly standing in a row like this for some reason. It said, "The board does not condone engaging in threatening, intimidating, or physically harming behavior against anyone in our school district community. We understand there are many folks who care deeply about the education of students, and we come together with different understandings and ideas about how best to provide that education. As we prepare our students to engage as citizens and community members, the adults in their lives should provide models of how to engage in productive civil dialogue." Addressing the father directly, the statement continued that this adult felt emboldened to behave this way in front of hundreds of students and other adults should deeply trouble us all. This type of behavior will not be tolerated. Now, something struck me about the subtle language chosen for this statement, because weirdly enough, it seems to allude to some kind of conflict or incident that they were aware of already. And the language seems to be indirectly, subtly chastising the father for handling his disagreements with the school, whatever they were referring to, in an incorrect way. So when I read this statement, I went, I wonder if there is something else going on here. Before we go any further, we need to set the stage, to identify the pieces on the board so far. The father who rushed the stage is 49-year-old Matthew Eddy, who was attending his daughter's graduation along with his wife, parents, and parents-in-law. The man he was seen shoving to the side was Baraboo School District Superintendent Rainey Briggs, who was hired in July of 2021 and actually, according to the news at least, finds himself embroiled in a seemingly unrelated scandal of his own right now, alongside school board president Kevin Vodak, who is actually also on stage, as you can see right here. And Kevin Vodak is facing a recall effort from some Baraboo residents over allegations that he misappropriated taxpayer dollars by increasing the salary of 2 district administrators, one of which was Rainey Briggs. There have also been some questions and some outrage from some residents over contracts granted by the district to Briggs's consulting firms, saying it showed favoritism and perhaps foul play. Of course, that could just be a small group of perpetually aggrieved drama queen parents, who knows. Finally, we also have the school resource officer who responded and investigated this incident, as well as the high school principal, Steve Considine. The next day, on June 5th, the school resource officer sat down with that same Baraboo High School principal to get his version of the events as they transpired. He explains a lot of what went on behind the scenes with staff and the enraged father in the seconds following the incident.
So just give me an idea of what you were doing, what you saw, what you felt.
Yeah, so as a high school principal, kind of in charge of graduation and some of the coordination of it. I was the last person in line, so we had one school board member handing the diploma and shaking hands, and then we had 3 other board members on stage, Dr. Briggs, and then myself. I was closest to the stairs.
Remember what he just said about the 3 other board members being on stage. That's very important later.
So she walked out. At that point, the other student in front of her, alphabetically, I was shaking their hand. Her, which I now know Dad, kind of jumped the steps and went around me. So I was shaking the hand, and he went around me, in front of me, off to the side here, to Dr. Briggs, put both hands, I believe, on the shoulders and tried to escort them. I am motioning to her with my right hand, I believe, to continue through, to shake my hand and get off the stage. That's when I hear Dr. Briggs say something to the effect of, "Get your hands off of me." And then, again, that's when I turned my head and see there was some sort of scuffle. That's when I went in front and inserted myself between Dr. Briggs and this guy, Mr. Eddy, I don't know his name. And then he was pushing back against me, so I would say that I directed him towards the curtain and just kept saying, "Get off the stage, get off the stage, get off the stage," with both hands on. He tried to then... we had kind of cornered him, myself, and I believe Dave Hosley, who was one of the speakers, and Joe Bovlinka, kind of cornered him, so he really couldn't go anywhere, so he tried to lift up the curtain. There were gymnastic mats underneath, so he scurried out. He ran off the stage. At that point, I saw other people running towards the stage, which were the picklers, and I pointed, because he ran off. I was trying to get them through the tunnel.
Did he... the dad, did he say anything to you directly towards you, or is it still all kind of directed towards Dr. Briggs that you can remember?
It was all directed at Dr. Briggs. There was nothing at me.
Almost immediately after the chaos cleared, police reports say Matthew Eddy was escorted out of the building, charged with disorderly conduct, and handed a $150 fine for his troubles. He was also barred from entering any of the district's school buildings forevermore. Well, I don't actually know if it was forevermore. I just like saying that word. But more importantly, he was taken in for a police interview that wasn't actually released to the public until just a few days ago. And even then, we only got a couple minutes of it. I found the entire thing. Well, actually, my fellow YouTuber Plunder True Crime found the entire thing. Huge shout out to her. During that time, speculation about the man's motivations ran amok, with most siding with the opinions that this was a purely racial incident motivated by the man's outrage at the thought of his daughter shaking a black man's hand. But when he starts answering police questions in this interview, an entirely different potential motivation comes to light. As it turns out, this man may have had a personal vendetta against the school superintendent because of an incident regarding his daughter's expulsion from Baraboo High School.
What happened there? It goes back to when my daughter was almost charged with a bunch of bullshit. Well, they wanted me in here. And when I brought up shifting it with my daughter, he shook his head and rolled his eyes. Now, not like anybody else in this district, it does not approve of him being a supervisor. But this comes down to my daughter. And I'm not cool with him. I'm not cool with him shaking my daughter's hand after treating her the way he did. He got up on stage to block him from shaking my daughter's hand after the bullshit that she had to go through. That's it. I didn't touch him until he touched me.
Huh. So when the officer asks Matthew why he was so upset at Dr. Briggs, he mentions an incident where his daughter was, quote, almost charged for some BS, though he doesn't yet mention what that BS was. He says that during a meeting with school officials that addressed this mysterious incident involving his daughter, he, quote, brought up some shite that happened to his daughter. And in response, Dr. Briggs essentially scoffed at him and rolled his eyes. However, we don't yet have the key clues to what precisely this meeting was addressing. Also, he mentions that he didn't touch Dr. Briggs until Briggs touched him, which, as we can see from the footage, was a total lie. He quite clearly puts hands on Dr. Briggs right here, and we can see that Briggs has not made any purposeful contact with Matthew himself at this point. Okay, let's keep going and see if we can figure out what this incident was all about, what this father was so worked up about.
I haven't seen what's happening. I didn't see what... I was in the crowd, so I didn't have a really good view of... I didn't really think about it, but I didn't feel it. Yeah, it's all I want to do. Because he does not deserve it. You can't hop up on a stage in front of graduation. Like, you obviously knew this was going to happen. Oh, yeah, for sure. So I mean, it was planned? No. I walked out when he granted to speak. I get that, but you obviously knew your daughter was going to go on stage. She was going to interact with him. Didn't want him to be able to shake her hand because he does not deserve it from her and all the shit she went through in this district. Okay, so that should have been something that was pre-planned. We can't do what we did today. Because now, I mean, think about how your daughter feels right now, man. Your dad just gave a father? I'm not. Okay. Are you? I don't know if that's relevant, honestly. There's a lot of graduates this year, right? There's a lot of people out there who just have this interrupted. I understand that I understand that you're feeling hurt and you're feeling like there were problems. I hear that, like 100%. There are other ways to handle that. Here's what I would say. From my perspective, as a district level administrator, right? If there are specific allegations you have around how one of our administrators or staff has treated your child, then we need to hear about it. Or the police need to hear about it, depending on what the allegations are. I'm not aware of allegations of Dr. Briggs doing anything to your daughter specifically. No, it wasn't him specifically. Okay. She was expelled for doing the same thing that was done to her, and nothing happened to the previous people, and we didn't have the meeting in there with him, the school board, an expulsion room. Yeah, and he rolled his eyes when I brought up the fact that the same thing happened to her. And it pissed And I can't do anything because we're in the middle of a court case. I hear you. I really do. Right now we're in the middle of a graduation ceremony. I understand that. Yeah. And I will be embarrassed about this as soon as I walk out of here. Because my daughter not only graduated this year, but she graduated a year early to get the out of here. To move on with her life. And just to get out of Baraboo school district. And all the teenage girls and all the bullshit. And I am so proud of her for that.
Okay, interesting. So it was right about here that I think I pieced together what this dad was getting at here. First, notice that he mentions that his daughter was expelled for, quote, doing the same thing that was done to her. And if you think about all the things you can be expelled for, like bringing guns to school, bringing drugs or alcohol, making threats, or being violent towards the other students of the staff, only the last two, the violence and the threats, are something that one student can really do to another student that, they'd be upset about. So it's probably safe to say that she was expelled for an incident that either involved violence or involved the threat thereof towards other students. He goes on to say that nothing happened to the previous people, meaning the people who did to his daughter what his daughter had then been expelled for doing to them. And on its own, that doesn't quite seem like enough, but there are two other pieces of information here to consider. One is that, according to a report from June 12th published by the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, as well as actually something mentioned in several other of the publications that covered this story, bullying has been a huge problem at this school and this district in recent years. The second, and much more interesting in my opinion, is something Matthew said at the end of the interview segment we just watched. He says that she graduated a year early to get away from all the catty girls. So it was at this point that I started to wonder if this was the string of events that led to the outburst. What if it was the case that Matthew's daughter was being bullied at Baraboo High School by a group of said catty girls, and they had been violent and aggressive with her even, but had never actually faced real consequences for it? Maybe the school was ignoring it, maybe the punishments that they got were insufficient. The school perhaps did nothing meaningful to stop it, in other words. So one day, as bullied kids often do, she lashed out at these catty girls, and she hurt someone, or maybe she threatened to do so. Only, unlike the girls who were bullying her, Matthew's daughter did get in a bunch of trouble. And remember that he mentions her being almost charged and later a court case during the interview, so this trouble was initially legal as well as scholastic. Then, when Matthew was attending his daughter's expulsion hearing for what she did, which, at least according to Matthew, the superintendent, Rainey Briggs, attended and took part in, he decided to make a point that his daughter was being treated totally differently than the girls who had been bullying her. And if we assume, just for a second, that Matthew's story isn't totally made up, it's not that hard to understand his frustration at the hypocrisy and unfair treatment of his daughter that his daughter received. If his story is true, or partially true, that would have been a reasonable point to make in that moment, right? Only, according to Matthew, when he raised that point at the disciplinary hearing, Rainey Briggs scoffed at Matthew and his daughter and rolled his eyes, dismissing their frustrations entirely. Was this the reason that Matthew had harbored such personal animus for Dr. Briggs?
But I do not want him to be able to have that one moment of shaking her hand and not even remembering who she was. Obviously, it needed to be handled in a different way. Is what I'm trying to get at. Because you obviously knew she was going to go up on stage. She's going to have an interaction with them. So when you're jumping up on stage and blocking whatever you did, I didn't see what happened, so I don't know what the physicality of it was. Was it a body block? I mean, what are you talking about? Exactly. That's all it was. Was there pushing? Was there shoving? Not telling me you got put his hands on me. I didn't come up there and knock him out or twist him down or somebody popped up on stage. we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I'm just going to put this out there. I mean, we've been on stage many times in these kind of situations, right? Or you think about it as a sporting event, right? If somebody in the audience jumps where they're not supposed to go and gets in your face, that's considered a pretty aggressive move. I hear you. Like, I hear you what you're saying about the lie. And I know that that's how you're feeling, right? And I'm not going to blame you for how you're feeling, anything like that, right? In this moment, that's not the way. And from my perspective, I wish we could have had a conversation around these kind of things prior, right? And we, kind of gotten to a place where you didn't be able to do that. Because the unfortunate reality now is that this was a pretty significant disruption. And I guarantee you, not the way the daughter wanted this to go. Probably not. You have your ID, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to get to our back gathering here, but we can be looking at disorderly conduct charge out of this. Okay.
But was Matthew telling the truth about any of this, or was this an elaborate story told in relatively subtle hints to convince people he wasn't acting out of bigotry? It did occur to me before we get into Dr. Briggs's side of the story that this interview was taken immediately after the incident occurred. He's even still wearing the same clothes he did during the incident, and one of the interviewers says, "We've got a graduation going on right now." And the only reason that's important is because Matthew kind of had no way of knowing yet that this story was going to blow up like this. Like, he had no way of knowing that this interview done in a small room with only 2 attendants would leak to the public and be critiqued and looked over and criticized in this way. So he either created this cover story purely to convince the cop and attending administrator that he wasn't racist, or he was telling his side of the story as he saw it. On balance, at least, I think the first seems slightly more likely than the second. However, there are 2 fairly obvious things working against Matthew's narrative here that are important to address. First, of the 6 people shaking students' hands up there, 3 men and 3 women, one of them was the school principal of Baraboo High, who we saw interviewed earlier, Mr. Steve Considine. Another was school board president Kevin Vodak, and this woman right here I identified as one Amy DeLong, who is also a member of the Baraboo School Board. And while I tried very hard to find some info on who exactly attends and decides on students' expulsions in Wisconsin, I discovered that these decisions are made by hearings conducted by the school board. Remember the school board statement from earlier and how it seemed to be alluding to some incident they were aware of. So in all likelihood, not only was Vodak involved in Matthew's daughter's expulsion hearings, but Amy DeLong possibly was as well. And it also seems logical that the principal of the school that this student attends would also be involved, right? So it would appear that while we can't definitively say for certain, other people involved in Matthew's daughter's expulsion were probably also on stage shaking hands. So then why single out Dr. Briggs, the one black man on the stage? Was his choice to do so based on Rainey Briggs's behavior during that specific moment that Matthew seemed so fixated on? Or did his decision to confront him specifically come from a more sinister motivation, like his own racial biases? The other obvious problem here is that Matthew did, verifiably, lie to the police about putting hands on Dr. Briggs first. In fact, any honest reading of the different angles here shows Matthew clearly being the aggressor, the one to grab Dr. Briggs first. And if he'd lied about that, he'd established himself, in my mind at least, as someone who was willing to lie to keep himself out of trouble. Finally, we have quite a bit of interview material from Dr. Briggs, who gave a couple of interviews on June 12th where he addressed the incident, how he's doing afterward, and even the allegations that this was motivated by racism. Dr. Briggs said that at first, he thought the man was trying to help him with something, but then he heard him say, "You're not going to touch my daughter," and backed away, wondering if the man had a weapon. It was split seconds, Briggs said, and I had to think, is he going to cause harm to me, to this room? It didn't make sense to me what was happening in that moment. But more interestingly, Briggs contends that he has never seen this man before in his life. He reiterated this several times. He said, "I have not personally had any interactions with him. I wouldn't have been able to pick this guy out of any crowd. It wasn't until after that I was able to pull his name up in the system to see who he was. And for obvious reasons, this struck me as a huge conflict between their stories here. While Matthew insists that Dr. Briggs had some kind of face-off with him and his daughter's expulsion at his daughter's expulsion hearing that apparently lives in his head rent-free ever since, Dr. Briggs swears he has never even seen, heard from, or talked to this man in his life. So then one of them is lying. Dr. Briggs also revealed that Matthew's lawyer had reached out to him this past Monday, saying, "I haven't heard directly from Mr. Eddy, but I did have a phone call yesterday with his attorney." The outreach was really to indicate that he understands his mishap in terms of what he did, what he's caused. He's remorseful. I took that as some form of apology, but that's not something I think at this time amounts to a solid apology from my perspective. But Briggs went on to say that even a real apology wouldn't do it for him as of now. He said, "I don't think an apology, an I'm sorry, makes this go away, because there's a lot of harm that was caused. My heart goes out, number one, to his daughter and to those 250 other students that were in the space. This is a moment in time for them that they'll never get back the way they had hoped for this to go." When Briggs was asked about the racial aspect of this, he said, "The optics don't look good. The optics are what people around the world have gotten to see, and it's caused them to formulate in their minds what was behind this situation. But ultimately, Mr. Eddy is the only one that could tell you whether this is racial or not." Finally, we got a big update on this story just today, just a couple hours ago, actually, because today was Matthew's scheduled court hearing over this incident, where a judge would decide on the validity of a temporary restraining order that Dr. Briggs had filed following the incident. In court just a couple of hours ago, a judge granted the restraining order and stated that Matthew Eddy must stay away from Dr. Briggs for the next 4 years. Should Matthew violate that order, he'll find himself paying $10,000 in fines and even possibly spending 9 months in jail. Asked in court if the incident had been racially motivated, big part of this story, right? Matthew's lawyer said, "My client's actions caused him to make an immature, patronizing, incredibly embarrassing decision. My client would have made the same decision at that time no matter who the superintendent was. My client understands racism concerns and the significant impact it had on our society as a whole, but what happened on May 31st had nothing to do with race." So, what do you think? Was Matthew Eddy's true motivation for rushing the stage simply the outburst of a petulant, hot-headed racist who couldn't bear the thought of his daughter shaking a black man's hand? Or was he angry about a much more personal interaction between himself, his daughter, and Rainey Briggs at her expulsion hearing? And in fact, the entirety of the way that expulsion was conducted and handled. Was Dr. Briggs lying when he said he'd never seen Matthew before in his life, or about whether he was unsure if his motivations were racial or not? Or was Matthew the one lying to create a story that explained away his actions in a way that didn't make him look like a raging racist? Either way, Matthew was dead wrong for rushing that stage, and we hope he feels like a damn fool and gets his just desserts for that, just in and of itself. Truly, our heart goes out to the daughter, whose mortified face could be seen pretty clearly as she realized her own father had just ruined this special moment for her and, to a certain extent, all of her classmates. The finale to what sounds like an already miserable high school experience for her. I am, as always, very curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I find these stories fascinating and fun to dive into, but I'm obviously in no way personally attached to the outcome. I like to speculate because it's fun. So theories, feelings, ideas, concerns, all welcome. Also, if you happen to be a resident of Baraboo who has some kind of inside scoop or information on this story, please don't hesitate to drop that added context for us as well. Okay, that about does it for me. I hope you enjoyed the show and that you like and subscribe and do all that stuff that helps me out. All right, I'm going to go eat some lunch. See ya!